And maybe that's why they weren't and aren't focused on very real security failures at the Capitol on January 6th, or maybe it's because a prominent Democrat is to blame for those security failures. According to the former Capitol Police Chief, Stephen Sund, who will join us in a minute, the House Sergeant at Arms turned down his National Guard request prior to January 6th because, quote, "I will never get this by Pelosi." Joining us now with more, the author of the brand new book. It's called Courage Under Fire. Former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund is with us. Sir, thank you for being here, number one. I'm sorry what happened to your fellow officers that day. It breaks my heart. A lot of my family has been in law enforcement. When any law enforcement officer is hurt, I'll let you tell the story. How many times in total do you recall requesting the National Guard?
Well, first of all, Sean, thank you very much for having me on tonight. And I really appreciate you kind of talking about the 2020 riots coming up to January 6th, because that's something I tie together in my book. There was a number of requests. I went on January 3rd requesting the National Guard from Paul Irving. That was the first request for the National Guard. I then went to Mike Stinger, who's the Senate Sergeant at Arms. Now, Paul Irving is politically appointed by Speaker Pelosi. He initially, when I asked for the National Guard on January 3rd, which was a Sunday, it was the first day of the new Congress, he said specifically, quote, "I don't like the optics." And besides, the intelligence didn't support it. His concern for the optics, I believe, goes back to Pelosi's decision or statement that she referred to federal agents and National Guard on the streets of America as stormtroopers. And I think she just didn't want the look of stormtroopers up on the Hill. And then come January 6th. And I think what your viewers don't realize is the restrictions I have as the chief of police. I'm one of the only chiefs in the United States. I am the only chief in the United States that has a federal law, a law passed by members of Congress, that prevents me from calling in any federal resources either in advance, like I tried to do on January 3rd, or even while I'm under attack without going and getting the politically appointed Sergeant at Arms approval. So at 12:53, we're attacked on the west front of the Capitol. I'm watching my officers getting brutally beaten. I pick up the phone at 12:55. I call MPD for assistance. They're our partner agency right next door. And then at 12:58, I call Paul Irving, Speaker Pelosi's appointee to the Capitol Police Board, and tell him it's really bad on the west front.
Can I interrupt you? Isn't
Yes,
the Speaker of the House in charge of security at the Capitol?
So you have the politically appointed Capitol Police Board that's put in place by, you have the Sergeant at Arms that's put in place by Pelosi, you have the Senate Sergeant at Arms that's put in place by the Senate leadership, and then you have the architect of the Capitol that's put in place by the President. So you have 3 voting members. I'm a non-voting member. I'm the only non-politically appointed non-voting member, and that's kind of how the security oversight works. But it was Paul Irving who immediately said, I'm going to run it up the chain. I'll never forget that, run it up the chain. His chain of command ends at Speaker Pelosi. And I had to wait 71 minutes to finally get an approval at 2:09 p.m. before I could finally reach out and start calling in federal assistance. 71 minutes while my men and women fought on the fought heroically to prevent the Capitol from being from being penetrated. And it took 80 minutes before the first window was broken. So those were critical, essential minutes that we're losing.
Let me go back a little bit, and it was a number of days out of January 6th, and the issue of the National Guard first came up, and you had not seen enough intelligence that convinced you that you would need the Guard at that time. Within a day or two later, correct me if my timeline is wrong, my understanding is that new intelligence came in that alarmed you to such a degree that you felt they would absolutely need the Guard, we would need other law enforcement help for the Capitol Police. Is that the timeline? Is that an accurate timeline?
No, that's actually not how it played out. So January 3rd, the morning of January 3rd, I went over to see Paul Irving at 9:34 a.m. in the morning to request the National Guard. The final intelligence assessment didn't come out to the evening of January 3rd. It was pretty much reviewed maybe on the 4th. But you got to understand, that intelligence assessment didn't even indicate the level of threat that we now know existed. The significant threat that was out there, the fact that the FBI was tracking 18 domestic terrorist suspects that were coming to the Capitol. And my intelligence unit on the 4th, 5th, and 6th put out intelligence that was saying low probability of civil disobedience. And what's interesting is my deputy chief and assistant chief over intelligence even had me recommended approval for the permits that were taking place on Capitol grounds. Most of those approvals came through on the 4th. So, here we are, the 5th. I've got a big video call with all the heads of intelligence, law enforcement agencies from the District of Columbia, as well as military leadership in D.C., and no one's setting up the balloon or ringing any alarms about the intelligence. So my request for the National Guard was based on my law enforcement experience. I knew I had a large perimeter. I knew we were going to have the vice president up on the Hill, as well as both joint sessions of Congress in place, and it was going to take a lot of my staffing. So I knew I didn't have significant staffing for the perimeter, and that's why I wanted the National Guard to help stand on the perimeter to help defend my perimeter.
Let me ask you this. Because I just played in full that NBC News report that our top law enforcement agencies, our top intelligence agencies, had information about people plotting, planning, and scheming an attack for that day. In other words, they knew this was a real, clear, and present danger, and yet there were no reinforcements sent to you. It seems like they left you hanging out there to dry. In retrospect, hearing that, what does that mean to you?
Well, I find that very concerning. I mean, having done many events, I mean, I've handled numerous inaugurations, numerous NSSEs. I've never seen intelligence handled this way before, and for events with far lesser threat streams. Usually the FBI would do a briefing, a joint intelligence bulletin, would call and do a conference call even. None of that occurred. Now we're finding out DHS, failed to share information, but my own intelligence unit didn't put some of the significant intelligence that I now know they had into their final assessment. There's a lot of things that could have been done. I was just going to say to better prepare us.
Yeah. What did you think of the mayor declining calling up the Guard under any circumstances until she said it was okay? By that point, it was way too late.
Well, I find that concerning. I find concerning the memorandum that's put in place restricting any National Guard from carrying any civil disobedience equipment. But I think the mayor's letter goes hand in hand with what Speaker Pelosi didn't want to see the stormtroopers out on the streets. So it really tied our hands that day. And, looking back at the way you started into this, talking about the January 6th committee, what people need to realize is the restrictions I had as the chief. And ask yourself why the January 6th committee never requested that I come and publicly testify. Think about that. I'm the chief of the Capitol Police. To have me come down and publicly testify before the January 6th committee, because I think they were concerned. It would begin to show what went on the 6th, what went on the days leading up to the 6th, and what was the involvement of political leadership and their appointees.
Wow. Well, this is a story that should have been highlighted, and frankly, we should have more security measures in place immediately. That should be a top priority. You agree with that last part? I have to run.
I absolutely agree, sir.